Welcome to the Servant Leaders Mindset channel. Where we help leaders to grow in wisdom, purpose, self-awareness, and service. Up next.
But in a dysfunctional environment or a toxic workplace, you have to remember it. I'm going to say it bluntly. They don't care about you. I mean, they really don't. They're about themselves. And sometimes organizations are actually, it's about the organization and our goal and mission or whatever, or the results. And it's not about the people. And they will take in and suck in and chew up and spit out people just to keep it going. And you've got to take care of you first. Not solely, but if you don't, nobody else really is going to.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to the show. I'm Dr. Lena Holmes, and this is the Servant Leaders Mindset podcast. Today, I'm pleased to welcome back to the show Dr. Paul White. Dr. White is a psychologist, author, and international speaker. He has co-authored a best-selling book with Dr. Gary Chapman, and it is titled The 5 Languages of Appreciation in the Workplace. Dr. White has provided services for top-tier U.S. corporations and other companies around the globe. His specialty includes providing practical ways for leaders and employees to communicate authentic appreciation that leads to a healthier work environment. However, our topic for today's show is how to recognize and survive a toxic work environment. Welcome to the show, Dr. White.
Thanks, Lena. Thanks for having me back.
Wonderful. So I'd like to start by asking you about preventative measures an employee can take to avoid these kinds of environments. I think it's important, obviously, to do research on companies that you might think about wanting to have hire you.
Right.
But I wanted to get your thoughts on, having said that, what are some of the warning signs of a toxic environment a potential employee might notice during the interview process?
That's a great question. Probably the best way to avoid a toxic workplace is not to work, because sometimes they're hard to tell, from the outside in. That a lot of places, look good from the outside. But I think, in the interview process, actually, one of the best things you can do is try to talk to as many people who work there outside of the interview, if possible. And especially if you have friends or people that have worked there in the past, you have to filter that a little bit, because a lot of times people leave, because of maybe a bad relationship. It doesn't characterize the whole organization. But, toxic, and just to define that, it's not just sort of, a bad place or it's got problems. It's toxic as in it's poisonous, it's unhealthy, it's damaging to you as a person. I mean, it's an extreme out there. And unfortunately, they aren't that uncommon, but you want to have a sense of open communication, honest communication, willingness to admit weaknesses and areas for growth within the organization. If everything's wonderful, my antenna goes up, because we know life is life, people are people, and we all have problems. And so they should be able to share with you what are some of the challenges that they're experiencing. And a key question I always encourage people to ask is, what are the characteristics of a person that really would fit well for this job? Because not everybody's going to fit well in a sales job or in an assistant job. And so to find out what's their view of what's good, I think a warning sign is when first of all, if it's a rush to hire you. I mean, it's like you've just answered the ad and this is it, and when can you start, is sort of the deal. That's a pretty big warning sign. And so you just have to have your senses out. And also, I mean, lots of times, depending on the size of the organization, the person interviewing you isn't going to be involved in your day-to-day work life. So I encourage people to ask to meet with whoever their supervisor is going to be or colleagues, at least before you accept the position.
Yeah, absolutely. And nowadays, it seems as though we have the tools to do a little bit more, a deeper dive into a company's culture with AI and some of these other tools that we have. And some job boards actually will rate that company based on its employees. And they sometimes they have, places where you can go and see the comments that employees make. But like you said, you have to weigh those things because sometimes people will report them and then some others will not. And maybe the people who are more likely to report something will be the ones that have something bad to say,
Yeah, exactly.
unfortunately.
Right.
Unfortunately. So let's talk about toxic leaders. And because since you're a psychologist and you've studied all this stuff, the DSM, which is your Bible for diagnosing personality disorders, and it describes the antisocial, the narcissistic, psychopathic, histrionic, and borderline personality disorders known as the clusters Bs. Of course, as we talked about, they can be diagnosed clinically
Right.
just by observing behavior. However, we can observe traits and so my question to you is, how do you know what are some of the signs that perhaps even maybe during the interview that you might kind of suspect that one of the CEOs are, you know, trending towards more narcissistic
Yeah.
predispositions, etc. What are some of the things?
Issues, especially around toxic leaders, is that they're talented. I mean, they didn't get where they are by being some doofus or, that, is just all about image, but they look good initially. They come across usually probably socially skilled. They're bright intellectually. They have a lot of energy. And often, especially for higher level leaders, they're very committed to achieving goals and are pretty good at doing that. Whether or not they achieve them or they get other people to achieve them is an issue. But the thing that I think it's more about picking up signs as you go along, because you can get sort of, there's that image of a frog being put in a pot of water that's just regular water, and then it heats up over time and doesn't notice the heat rising. I think it's looking for signs along the way. And toxic leaders are usually pretty narcissistic. And that term has been used a lot in our culture lately, but a narcissist really is focused on themselves and only themselves. Virtually everything they do or don't do is designed by them to make them look good, to have a good image. So they're, especially people that are skilled, they're pretty good about being manipulative in using things and people and situations to make them look good. That's always sort of the outcome that they're shooting for. So they'll steal credit for other people's work and successes. I mean, like a manager may have a team or a team member who did a really good project, and he or she will take credit for that to other people. They're pretty condescending. They're cocky. They believe in themselves and their skills, and it's hard to tell if they really do believe that they're better than everybody else, but they sure come across that way consistently. And so you always sort of feel in a one down position to them and never related to as an equal. And as you and I know, I mean, people are people. We have strengths, but we have weaknesses and deficits. And if
Hmm.
they never admit that they're not good at X, Y, or Z, I mean, I'm a pretty good writer. I've written 5 books, decent speaker, but I am not good with machines. Fixing my lawnmower just is not a thing I'm good at. So, you have to have a sense of strengths and weaknesses. And so they are image conscious. They really always try to focus on looking good rather than necessarily being good. There's a differentiation for them. And they have no qualms at all about using other people to get where they want to go. And you will see this over time that they sort of have a trail of sort of body parts left of people that they've worked with that they've run over and run through to get where they are. And it's just like, they don't care. They're smarter than them and they were able to use them. So if you have a sense of being used, never being authentically for what your contributions are, I'd really put, uh, warning signs up.
Yeah, to find if you could probably talk about this a little bit, also the lack of empathy is astonishing.
Yeah.
with these personality types.
Yeah,
And
they tend to say if you have a problem, it's your fault, and
mhm.
you don't get much sympathy or empathy coming from them at all. Yeah.
And also to, never made a mistake, can never make a mistake. It's like, that is also part of it as well. And, never willing to apologize for anything. There's just an amazing and then also the other part of it I noticed is the pathological lying.
Yes. That's one
And
of the
it's almost like like you said earlier about you don't know necessarily do they believe that? Do they really believe that about themselves? Or is this something they're so used to living in their own reality
yeah.
that,
And
uh
that's actually a pattern, for sort of toxic leaders is that they try to control the flow of information. So they
mm,
will have people reporting up, let's say, to them, and then they gather that, and nobody else has access to that, or it could be the opposite way. And so they cherry pick what information they share, and it may be different with different people, whether it's investors or employees. And they're very controlling. They feel controlling about information and people. I mean, they don't have a usually a problem telling people what to do. They don't usually ask people.
interesting. So I mentioned to you before we got started that I saw a study by the Harvard Law Corporate Governance Forum, and they seem to come up with the data that 18% of CEOs have that a high level of this trait or narcissistic trait or some level of it, not necessarily diagnosed with a personality disorder. And the general population is somewhere between three, maybe 1 to 5%. Why do you suppose that these narcissistic types or antisocial, etc., why do they gravitate toward these kinds of positions as CEOs or leaders?
Yeah. Well, I don't know for sure, but there are a couple of themes. One is they're out for themselves, and so they're seeking rewards for themselves, which is can be control and influence. It can be image and popularity and so forth. It also can be financial. And so, I mean, that's a CEO position has those. And so it sort of has the goal that they're looking for personally. So they're driving towards that rather than, being a servant to other people or the
Mhm,
organization. Right. And so I think there's that part. And, the the talented ones are gifted, they're energetic, and so they do the things necessary to sort of play the game within the world of work or business or government, whatever, that helps them rise. And also, they don't have the ethics that holds
mhm.
some of us back from using and manipulating and just destroying people on the way up. And so they get the positive and don't feel the downside of it.
So, in your experience, do you find that leaders hire people who are similar to their own personalities? At least in my experience, that sometimes these types of personalities will cluster, where they will come together and create a very toxic environment, and it gets more and more toxic. What is your thoughts on that in terms of these type of leaders? Who are they looking to hire?
Yeah.
So what's your
So,
opinion on
yeah,
that?
so mid-career for me, I was working with highly successful multimillionaire family-owned businesses and business leaders and also their advisors. And I think it actually sort of splits in two directions. A lot of times there'll be a small cluster of these talented, sort of manipulative, highly goal driven people work together for a while because they see how they can get to their goals together or with other people quicker than by themselves. So it's clearly utilitarian from their point of view. However, those relationships don't last long. I mean, you look, this is going to sound political, but you look at Donald Trump and Elon Musk, okay?
Mm.
They come together for a while and then they split and they're enemies and then they come together. I don't know what, I mean, I have some opinions, but they have some characteristics that, you know, they're bright and they're talented and they don't have a shortage of confidence. And so they work together with others who can help them achieve their goals. And when they disagree, it's almost sort of like a massive split for a while, at least. So I think there's a temporary kind of coming together, but there's
Mhm.
also these people, they are looking for minions, if you will, people who will follow them and do what they say and not be a threat. So I think they're also looking for people that they can influence and maybe deceive for a while, and
Mhm.
to get things done. Again, maybe this person has a connection, a family connection, or a political connection, or whatever, to be able to get the contract, and then they're of no use. So I see it sort of flow in two different directions.
I think loyalty is an issue. I've been in toxic environments when there were certain people that were sort of selected for the purpose of getting everybody else in line with the goals in terms of the loyalty towards the leader,
Mhm.
and that people that would challenge them were not there long.
Right, right, right.
What about that? And in terms of also, I notice in those environments, favoritism seems to be a very strong cultural
Yeah,
environment.
you know, we all have our weaknesses and maybe misbeliefs about people, about life. And some of those make us vulnerable to be taken advantage of. And, you can see a pattern around a number of successful narcissistic leaders that they gather people around them, at least for a while, that enjoy being associated with them and the success and the power and the influence. And sometimes for a long time, and then other times, there's a parting of the ways, often around maybe a value decision that the follower disagrees with. I just think it's interesting that I don't know what the personality, I mean, clearly there's sort of a dependent personality type that is looking to latch on to, a strong leader and identify with them and follow them almost blindly. And, uh, I don't know. I mean, I see that more popularly, politically in the culture than I necessarily do at work. But what happens is that these people that are narcissistic, at least part of who they are and what is an image, and they can't keep it together over their lifetime, hardly
Mm,
ever. And so there is a falling out, and sometimes it's after they die that
mm,
you find out things that you didn't know. But when you're living a lie, the truth is going to come out at some point, I think,
absolutely.
usually. But it's hard for people that follow them to accept that when the evidence is starting to come out and they become real defensive, until it's almost like illogical to continue to believe your trust in them.
Yeah, and sometimes I think they last a little bit longer in those positions when you put people who they're almost like manipulating each other,
Mm.
meaning, the person is telling the narcissist everything they want to hear,
Yeah, yeah.
and they know what sort of those triggers are. It's almost like
A
it's like a
codependent, yeah, it's a
yeah,
codependent kind of relationship.
exactly.
Yeah,
That's a great word for that. And so they feed off of each other.
yeah, yeah.
And so how do you think toxic behavior in an organization or whatever, in whatever group of people that assemble themselves, how is that normalized? Because we see it everywhere. Like you said, we see it in government. We see it even in churches,
Sure.
and which is like supposed to be a place where ethics should be strong. And
Right,
so
right.
we've seen that. And we've been seeing a lot of that lately about churches just disintegrating
Yeah.
because of a leader who has those tendencies, but nobody has picked that up because it's in a church environment.
When we looked at toxic workplaces, we found that there were some structural things as far as poor communication and lack of accountability and that kinds of thing. And then you have toxic, at least a toxic leader, if not some leaders at different levels. But then the third part were really just sort of dysfunctional team members, you and me or colleagues or whatever, whatever. And we're all dysfunctional to some point. But these are people that the dysfunction is that their behavior does not work in reality. I mean, DYS is, not. And so it's people that, blame. They never fully accept responsibility for their actions. They make excuses. They're able to sort of create smoke screens by getting somebody else, two other people to have a conflict that sort of hides what they're doing. Um,
Triangulation is what it's called, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And they also sort of stonewall. They don't share information freely and sort of keep information to themselves. And so, and sort of anger outbursts and all different kinds of behaviors that you see, that's where I think we tend to let things slide more, partly out of, I think, a fear of conflict or bringing things up, partly out of a fear of getting an emotional response either from them or within ourselves. And it's really important. I think that's where the structural part of dysfunctional places is important, to have clear roles and responsibilities. Because if somebody's working as a team on something and one of the persons really doesn't do their job, they can sort of slide and blame the other person. But it's having clear, direct communication. That was one of the key factors that we saw in toxic workplaces, was a pattern of indirect communication, that I would send a message to maybe the manager through another team member so that it was a little bit garbled. And if they got mad, they got mad at the messenger rather than they got mad at me. And just sort of smoothing over clear, direct communication is a pattern that creates all kinds of problems in organizations.
That's interesting. Yeah, and in terms of a structure, like you said, in terms of how, how information is disseminated. For some people, they get more information than others, which kind of makes them which elevates them.
Right. A couple other characteristics of the sort of dysfunctional people. One is that they lie. I mean, they don't tell the truth, and it can be just withholding information. They tell a partial truth, or they out and out lie about it until they're, called account to it. There's also often a sense of entitlement rather than a clear relationship between responsibilities and privileges, and they're focused on that. And the blaming and making excuses is just like a hallmark of these people. They're often quite talented at it, but it's consistent. It's like if somebody's late to work, they would say, well, the traffic on the freeway was just crazy, and that may have been the case, but they didn't tell you that they also left a half hour late. So
Mhm.
just that misinformation. And I think with some of the management systems that are coming out now, that there's a better sense of, having goals and setting goals and target behaviors, and holding people accountable to it. That helps for sure, as long as you actually do hold them accountable.
Can you speak to, I think going back to the lying part, there's a lot of gaslighting that goes on, false narratives or narratives that are repetitive, and it gives you this sense that, especially if it's coming from leadership, that, well, it must be true, right?
Right.
And a lot of times it's not.
It's tough these days to know what to believe at times, whether that's within the organization, and or just in the world at large. I think one of the things that we found that was helpful to people when they're feeling, and this is maybe gets to the heart of the matter for individuals, when you're working in a dysfunctional place, it's unhealthy for you. It's just not tough or difficult. I mean, you're losing sleep, right? You're staying awake, worrying about, you're just, ruminating about things. You're losing sleep. You start to have physical symptoms, whether that's a backache or, gastrointestinal problems or whatever. And you need to pay attention to those, because your body is sending you signals that you are in a toxic environment, that you're breathing
Mhm.
in, you know, essentially poisonous gas that's not healthy for you. And one of the things that we encourage is to try to find a trusted consultant, not a professional person, but somebody that you can say, this is what's happening at work, and this is how I'm responding or feeling about it. Am I crazy? I mean, because that's what part of the toxic, you get to not thinking straight, right? You start to question your own judgment, that I guess that's okay to do that. When, previously you would have thought, no, we should, say things that aren't true to the public and so forth. But sometimes we need somebody outside of the system, or it could be someone trusted within, to be able to bounce our observations and responses off of, to see how reality based we're thinking.
Yeah, that's a good strategy too, and that's what I was gonna actually segue to, is what are some of the strategies, and also understanding too that this is trauma. You are experiencing trauma, and how long does a person stay in that situation? So, what kind of situation should the person seek a mental health professional in that kind of situation?
Yeah, well, and let me tie it into like churches and nonprofits. That I worked for a nonprofit for, oh, I don't know, 10 years or so, and generally it was a healthy thing. But they did have this card that they play occasionally, and that was the mission card, and that is, don't you want to do something to further God's kingdom or to help people? And, it's a good mission, but how much do I give of myself to do that, when it's just keeps sort of a take kind of thing. And so you have to be careful about that when you're in a mission driven organization, that you're not getting sort of hoodwinked by the focus on the mission and not how you're going about it. I mean, my goodness, to be honest, when we did research with organizations on the toxic workplace, some of the worst examples were churches and Christian organizations, unfortunately, because you get sort of blinded. And then there's the whole thing about authority and, that kind of thing. And so I think one of the things that we encourage people to do is think through and set boundaries about what you are and you're not willing to do
Excellent.
in communication, in time, in energy, maybe what kind of actions or whatever. And try to do that early because you get fogged and it'll move a little bit. But in a dysfunctional environment or a toxic workplace, you have to remember it. I'm going to say it blunt. They don't care about you. I mean, they really don't. They're about themselves. And sometimes organizations are actually, it's about the organization and our goal and mission or whatever, or the results. And it's not about the people. And they will take in and suck in and chew up and spit out people just to keep it going. And you can see it from a distance. I mean, we've had a couple of nonprofits locally over the years that almost went under until, somebody came in and straightened things out. But you have to remember, they don't necessarily care about you. And you've got to take care of you first, not solely, but if you don't, nobody else really is going to.
Mhm. Absolutely. And I've been in nonprofit world for a long time as well. What I find too is that board of directors, and I would say probably the same for corporations. The only difference is the incentive is different in terms of when you talk about a board that's is sort of overseeing from a distance the CEO. And so if you don't have boards that are responsive
Mm.
to really overseeing the work of the CEO, besides just coming to board meetings and the CEO reports, oh, look at all these wonderful things I'm doing. And the stockholders or the, in a corporate setting, "Oh,
Right,
look at all the money I'm making you."
right.
How do you, and again, this is the servant leader's mindset. So my, in terms of narcissistic or toxic environments, is there hope for them? If you've got somebody who has a pattern going on and almost to the point of a personality disorder, that person, no matter how much you train them and show them the numbers, they're not going to change.
Right.
So, what do you, suggest in terms of people who are coming into organizations as consults
Mm.
and saying, "You got a problem here,
Right, right.
and here's what your problem." Have you ever experienced where people were in denial about that?
Yeah, or they were afraid of the interim implications if they deal with it. I use this example both for toxic leaders and also dysfunctional team members, that aside from the work of God in our lives, we're probably going to continue to do the same behaviors. But, there's hope there, but it really is sort of a hope and a prayer. And I wouldn't, from a business point of view, rely on that. So it's sort of like in my part of the country in the Midwest, we have black walnut trees and they get really big and then they have walnuts and they're pretty and all that, but they're toxic and nothing else can grow around them. The roots, there's a little bit of grass, but that's about it. When the leaves fall, everything dies. So you can have a wonderful walnut tree creating all this kind of fruit, but you got nothing else going, right? And so toxic leaders are sort of like that. I mean, they can create some results, but they're going to kill everybody else or make everybody else sick around them, whether that's administrative assistants or, administrators or whatever. And so assuming they really are a truly toxic person, you need to get rid of them. Otherwise, it's just going to poison the whole system. Not that the system will die, but it's just going to sort of limp along and always have these problems. And what you have to do if you work within the system is you absolutely have to document everything about what you're doing because they're going to come after you, because they're going to fight for survival. And if you're raising problems, so you got to document. You don't sort of just do things verbally, but after you have a meeting, you agree and you write them a follow-up email and say, it's my understanding that this is what you want me to do, ABC. And if it's not the case, please let me know. So that you've got it there. And because if it's a he said, she said, like in a lot of cases, they're talented enough that other people are going to believe them versus you. And so
Mhm.
you've got to protect yourself and also get rid of like the thorn in your finger if you're going to get healthy.
What about HR departments? What role should they play? I've seen them play roles, but not roles that they should
Yeah.
play because it seems like they're more biased towards the boss, who is usually the CEO.
Yeah.
So when they're really supposed to be playing a role that is unbiased,
Yeah.
how does one, how does the person, do you suggest that they go to HR to get help about that? What are your thoughts about
That's a
that?
difficult situation because I believe in direct communication and HR by involving them becomes an indirect communication. I mean, and so there's just really problems with how our HR system is set up that it creates additional problems that aren't easily resolved. So again, my druthers would be you take either your supervisor or a colleague with you to meet with this person with concrete examples of what the issues say, you're deceitful or whatever. You say, here you didn't tell the truth about this, and you have to
Mm.
have very specifics versus if you make global conclusions, they're going to wiggle out of it. It's difficult. And HR is in a difficult position because they report to, the CEO or whatever.
Mm.
But if I were an HR person, I would always try to facilitate a direct meeting between the two people with me being present to document what's going on.
So toxic environments in terms of, can they be rehabilitated? And if so, what are some of the steps towards that? And if they can't be, would be my second follow-up question. What is the best way to leave a toxic organization without being harmed by it?
Yeah, well, I'll answer the first one. I think they can be rehabilitated. It takes effort, it takes courage, and hard decisions, and you're going to go through probably a decline of functioning in the interim because you're going to have to get rid of people, and you're going to look bad in public when the press hits or whatever for a while. But you bring in healthy people, whether it's a board of directors or leaders of the organization that are committed to straightforward serving their clients because that's what the mission of both business and nonprofits are, and rebuild that. It can be tough, but it can be done, and I've seen it done. So give hope, but most people individually, unless you're really high in the organization, you're not going to be able to enact that change yourself. And so you have to decide, how long am I going to hang in here? And most people, I would say my observation is most people hang on longer than is healthy for them, that they're committed and they want to do a good job and they, believe in the mission and want to make it work. But just at some point, especially when you see a rotation of people through positions, that's a big warning sign. I mean, that people are getting out because they see it's not working for them. And I think really the telltale sign for a person is when you just see the impact on your own life, sleep, of health, relationships, personal relationships, more agitated and angry and easily upset with people you love, and they don't really like being around you, you know, you got to take a look at that and say, yeah, this probably isn't a good environment.
I think you're right. I think that most people stay way too long and the effects are still with them even after they leave the organization.
Sure. Yeah.
And
And
then
I'm sorry. I would say one of the things is that you don't want to wait until you have to take a parachute to go out of a plane that's crashing, right? You need to do a little pre-work, whether that's, getting your resume up to speed or getting some training or start networking because it can take a while, right? And so you want to sort of build a pathway and don't necessarily look for the perfect job going out. It's just you really are looking for an escape route to sort of recover and then move on. So it's sort of like a place that you could be for 6 to 12 months, be okay, and if it works out, fine, but maybe it's just an interim, a stepping stone.
Mhm. Absolutely. Well, I thank you so much for, taking the time to be a guest on the show. This is a very important topic, and I think that we cannot talk about it enough.
Yeah. Well, I would just offer, you know, we have a website. It's called appreciationatwork.com. It's the word at. If you're interested, I have a book on toxic workplaces and also some videos, sort of a video training series of dealing with toxic leaders and so forth that I think can be a good resource, as well as just some other articles that we've written.
Thank
Okay.
you so much,
You
Dr.
bet.
Paul.
Thanks for having me.